What do you do when you're working in a small sketchbook and you have lots of items that you want to include in your sketch, but you don't really know how to get them all in there? This is from a recent trip that I made to Mission San Javier del Bac in Tucson, Arizona. And this little sketchbook is only 5.5 by 5.5 inches. So I was able to cram a lot of information into this one little page. But I had taken some photos around the mission. The church itself was under construction, so I didn't include that. But I included that little garden wall that you see there with the cactus on the side. And then there was a little chapel off to the side. And although I couldn't get the whole building, I got the main part of it with the entrance, which was really the most interesting. And then I also just wanted to include some of the cactus and other plants that I saw there on the grounds. So this was my layout, and I managed to get a little space between each of those small sketches, as you can see. And I decided to include a frame on each of them. So I did my pencil drawing first, and then I used my Pigma Micron O3 pen, which is a little thinner than the one I normally use to draw it in. So I've sped it up here just for the sake of time, but you'll be able to see me do each of the little sketches. And notice that on 2 out of the 3, I took the images right out of the frame, but you have to plan that ahead of time. And I planned it in my pencil sketch. And you don't always have to do your little frames in ink either. You could do that in pencil and just leave it that way. But I really like the ink, especially for this small of a page. Notice, though, that those figures going into the little chapel, I didn't draw those in ink. I just left those in pencil, and because I don't want them to be too prominent. It was just a point of interest, and I don't really want to call too much attention to it. So I'm just going through, doing each of the sketches, following my pencil lines. You can see that on that large saguaro cactus on the left in that one sketch, I took it just a tiny bit out of the frame. Kind of wish I had made that arm a little longer. Then on the bottom section, the cactus on the left and the tree or bush on the right also went out of the frame, which is just nice for visual interest. Once I got all my sketching done, and this is with a permanent pen, I erased all of my pencil lines except for the 2 figures in the doorway. I needed to have those for later on. I'm just cleaning off my eraser bits there. And then I could move on to my watercolor sketching. So how do I decide what goes in a frame and where in a sketch like this? Well, it depends on the size of the object that I'm wanting to sketch and the format, whether it's a portrait, a vertical format, or a landscape. And you can see even in this little sketch of that, it's kind of a tiny sketch of that chapel. It was a vertical format because I cut off the walls on either side, so that fit nicely in that little space. So it's really just a matter of trying to fill the space. And you can play around with different layouts. You can take them across the page and have more of a panorama look. It's just really fun to play around with that. So here I'm just, one thing I want to mention here, you might be wondering why I am painting that building, that white building, with a little bit of a bluish gray color. If you look at the photo, you can tell that it was in shadow, and it's kind of reversed from the way that I would normally paint it, because the shadows up in the bell tower are in the arches. The arches have the shadows, which is kind of backward for me. But anyway, I just painted it the way that I saw it. And that's the reason for that. I would have preferred to leave it white, but I wanted to show the shadows. Here I'm doing those little figures, and I'm really not a figure painter. I want to do more of it, but I don't do a lot of it. But they're small figures, and you can do enough of a representation with just a few strokes to get it to look like people in the distance. There I decided to make that look like a woman with the hair a bit longer and a dress. And I just put little feet on her. No arms. You don't really need that for someone so far away. And here, the person that's a little closer to us, I that might be a male or it could be a female in pants, and I decided to put that person with a red shirt, which draws a little more attention. But that's about all you have to do. I put little feet on both of them, but I didn't worry about the arms. And when the viewer looks at that, they know that that's two people without giving them any more information. There I'm just filling in the little plants that were on the side of the chapel. And the bell at the top, there were 3 areas for a bell, but only one actually had a bell, so I just stayed with what was in the photo. And it's really fun and less intimidating to do these smaller drawings. If you don't think you're good at drawing, or the idea of filling out a whole page intimidates you, try something like this. Try a bunch of smaller sketches on one page. They go fast, and it's a lot less intimidating, and gosh, it's really good practice to try all of these different things on a single page. Just filling in the background there as they walk into that chapel. I couldn't really see what was there, so I just made it dark. And then I wanted to get in the shadows under the people on this sketch, because the shadows add a lot. They call attention and add a lot of interest to paintings. So I wanted to make sure to get that in. And I'm happy with the way that tiny little sketch came out. It's probably no wider than about an inch and a half. But it turned out pretty cute. And then on to the larger one. By the way, I start, when I sketch or put on color, I move over to the right-hand side of the page because I'm left-handed. And I don't want to drag my hand through wet paint. So that's why I start on that side. If you're right-handed, you would start on the left side. And it's just to be able to keep working without having to get your hand in what you already painted. So this little sketch of this little garden that was next to the church, that was a nice little garden gate and wall, which is why I put it in there. And there was a mountain behind this wall, a little mountain, and I can't remember the name of it. But that day there were a lot of people visiting this mission, and a lot of the people were hiking up that hill to that cross, and I don't really know why. But it was really interesting to watch that, and they made a point of saying that hill and that cross at the top are not part of the mission property. It might be privately owned, I'm not sure. Here I'm trying to get as close as I can to the color that's on that wall, that adobe wall. To me, when I look at it, it is a brownish color, tan, but it also had a lot of a rose color in it. So when I mixed up my paints, I added a bit of permanent rose to my mix. I think I used quinacridone burnt orange, a little bit of yellow, maybe a tiny bit of cad red, and then the permanent rose. And there was a brick walkway, but I didn't really want to spend time doing the bricks, so I just painted the color of bricks and let it go at that, because later on I'm going to put some shadows over it. Now that hill in the background, I had to remember as I paint that hill that you can see through the door and the little arch above the door of the wall. You can see that hill, so I have to make sure that I paint those all the same color. That's something that's easy to forget. It would look ridiculous if I had painted that arch above the door with the sky color, because it's actually part of the mountain. I know in the photo it's part of the sky, but the way I drew it is part of the mountain. So you just need to pay attention to what you're doing. And I just put some different greens in there, mixed up some yellow and some probably sap green with a little bit of ultramarine blue to make that color. And those two colors look different to me, so I went back and fixed that to make sure that it all looked like part of the same object, the mountain. And there I'm just putting in some quin burnt orange for the dirt that was out there. And there I'm going back in to try to match up those colors. And for the moment, I think I forgot that little arch above the door, but I'll get back to that. Now I'm doing the saguaro on the left, and I started with my lighter greens, mostly yellow and a little bit of green mixed in. And I want to keep that on more on the shadows. As I get the darker colors, I want to keep it more on the shadow side and try to preserve some of that nice light color. And notice how fast I go. This video is sped up, but even so, you can tell I'm not that careful about applying the color. And I leave lots of white. If you look at that saguaro on the left, there's still lots of white on it. And that's really the beauty of sketching, is that it doesn't have to be perfect, and actually sketches turn out to look pretty charming when they're all finished that way. The prickly pear cactus in the garden had some beautiful purple color on it, and so I wanted to get that onto the prickly pear. And that helps to differentiate one cactus from another. Then that cute little barrel cactus there had a lot of yellow on it, so I put some yellow on first and then added the green in between the yellow. It's a nice way to make, even though those objects are very close in color, it's a nice way to differentiate one from the other. They're just getting in some rocks that were in the garden. And I will move around a painting to let things dry. So, for example, that doorway, I'm going to have to go back and paint the arch in it with a shadow color, and I'll have to go back and paint the dirt color that is in between the cactus in the garden. But I'm just letting everything dry right now. So then I moved on to my bottom sketch, and I'm just doing the objects there. That I'm not happy about that tree, but it was just something I stuck in there to finish it off, because we have lots of trees and bushes like that in Arizona, but it's not my favorite. Oh well, I'll live with it. Some more prickly pear cactus with the beautiful purple, and another barrel cactus. All kinds of cactus. And I try, when I lay down color like that, notice how much of the yellow I left. I just try to preserve some of that so it doesn't all get covered up with the darker color. And that was some kind of cactus, maybe an organ pipe, I can't remember. Another prickly pear with the purple. And then there's another little barrel cactus stuck in between that aloe plant and the prickly pear. I managed to get quite a few things in that little space. And then the aloe cactus. I'm going back to the doorway here with a shadow color to get that in. And then I finally got the green color in that upper archway for the mountain. And look, see there, I just put in little touches of the ground color, but not very carefully, just to get something in there. And it looks fine. Now one more cactus to do down in the left-hand corner. I still have to go back and do shadows in that upper painting, but I may have to wait for some more things to dry. There I was just adding in some bricks that I saw in the photo. I thought that was a nice touch to the top of that wall. And the little cross on the hill, I couldn't really see the side of it, but I made a side to the base of it so that it would give some perspective. Now I'm adding in some of the shadows, and the shadow color I normally use is manganese blue with a little bit of permanent rose, and then I gray it down by just adding a tiny bit of green to it. And that gives me a nice shadow color that's not too prominent. Now I'm going back to that aloe plant at the bottom, and notice how I get my lighter colors in first, and then I go back in with the darker color and add that. And I think I'm purely making up that color from other plants that I've painted, aloe plants that I've painted, but it's close enough. adding in some of the ground color there for those plants. And then I could have just left the rest of that frame unpainted, but I thought, oh, I'll add a little bit more color. So I added some of the manganese blue for some sky color in that. And I really like that. I like how that turned out. It's a small space, but it really looks good with the blue. So that's pretty much it. I think I've gotten all of the shadows in. Now I wanted to do some lettering. I wanted to put the name of the mission in there. And I have to measure where I'm going to put this because it's a long name. Mission San Javier del Bac. It's a lot of words. And I thought, where am I going to fit them? I looked at doing it on one line or two lines. I didn't want the whole thing too close to the top of the paper, the page. But I finally decided on 2 lines to get all of the letters in there. And I had to play around with this a bit with pencil before I even went to ink, just trying to fit everything in. And you might wonder why I turned the book around and I'm writing sideways. And again, it's because I'm left-handed. And when I learned calligraphy many, many years ago, for left-handed people, to get the right slant with the wide edge pens, it should be a 45-degree slant. You have 2 options. Either use a special type of a nib called an oblique nib, which is really hard to hold, or just turn your paper sideways and learn to write downhill. And that was how I always did it. It clicked with me right away, and that's how I've always done calligraphy. I don't have any problem looking at it sideways. I don't know, it just worked better for me than trying to work with an oblique nib. So here you can tell I've erased, I put in some letters and then erased them. I'm trying to get the right spacing so that I can get all of the letters in there. That top line is the longest, and I had to make sure I could get everything in. And then the other challenge I had was the 2 crosses that came out of the frames on those 2 sketches, and I had to work around those. So it may not be the ideal, but this is how I did it, and I'm okay with it. I've had this challenge with other missions that I've painted, the California missions as well, trying to get all of the names in on the page. Now what I'm doing here is I'm not erasing the whole thing, but I'm getting ready to letter with ink, and I erased as much as the pencil as I could without erasing the whole thing. And I'm using one of my elegant writer pens that's made by Speedball. I picked out 2 colors. I picked out orange and brown, and I want to test and see which one I want to use. These pens, this is water-soluble ink, so you have to be really careful and do it at the end of a painting, because if they get wet, they're going to run. I like the orange better. I picked the orange for this, and I really like that. But they have a wide nib on them so that you can do calligraphy. And so that's what I chose. And there you can see I'm doing the lettering, and you get the thick and the thin. This alphabet that I used is an adaptation of the Uncial alphabet, which I use quite often. I just really like it. And Uncial writing, the Uncial alphabet, I believe came from Ireland. And maybe that's why I like it, because I'm Irish. But it works really well in small spaces too, because it does not have too many ascenders and descenders, letters that go above and below the line. They're all pretty much on the line, and in a small space that's really important. So here I did manage to get it in. That's one line, and now I've got the second line, and I have to make sure the letters don't run into each other. If I had done this again, I think I might take the words Del Bac and try to fit them in between those 2 crosses, but this is okay too. So there you have it. And I like how that came out. For a tiny little sketch, I like that. And one other note about that lettering, I want to make sure it's really dry before I go back and try to erase any remaining pencil lines. So I took it off to my heat gun and made sure it was really dry. Then I come back and I can erase those bits of pencil lines that still remain. And now I want to take just one last look at my whole sketch and make sure I haven't forgotten anything. And here's some shadows that I'm adding in. There was a post that was the other side of that gate, and it had a nice shadow, and I wanted to make sure that was represented. And then it would look really nice to get some shadows on the wall from the cactus as well. So I got that in, that nice saguaro shadow. And then the organ pipe cactus to the right of that needs a shadow. And look how nice, it just makes them stand out better when you get that dark behind them. And then my rocks, I had forgotten to put a shadow on the rocks, darkening up the shadows from the tree that go across the walkway. Oh, and I had forgotten to go in and paint that little tree that was there in that sketch. So I just quickly filled that in with some quinacridone burnt orange. Now I'll take it back to the heat gun for some more drying. And now that everything on the page has been dried, I can go back over that lettering and erase those pencil lines. But one other thing I noticed is that some of my color, now that it's dried a little bit, looks a little weak. So I want to go back in and darken some areas of my little sketches. The saguaro cactus on the left really looked light to me. It had lightened up a lot. And so I went back in and darkened up the shadow side of it. It just adds so much when you get more darker value in a painting. When you look at paintings, probably one of the first things you notice in a weak painting is that it lacks value and contrast. So I'm just kind of working around any areas that look weak to me. I'm going back in and darkening up the color. And now it's time to sign my name. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing. And thanks so much for watching.